Welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast. Here is Munir El-Azouzi from easymedicaldevice.com, and we'll continue today to discuss about eQMS. Last week we had discussed about the eQMS implementation. So mainly when you are starting to have a new project or maybe transitioning from a first eQMS to a second one. So we define really all the different steps that you have to follow. And this week we will discuss about an eQMS validation. And again, I have with me Jacob Sjorslev from SimplerQMS. So he's the CEO and founder of SimplerQMS. And he will help us really to understand how to validate an electronic quality management system. So Jacob, welcome to the Medical Device Made Easy podcast.
Thank you, Munir. And we appreciate that we can be a part of this podcast.
Great. So thank you for that. So as I've said, last week you had already told us a lot about electronic quality management system implementation. So this week we'll really go on the validation because I think there are some specific rules now related to validation. So why an eQMS or a software that is really managing documentations for your quality management system needs to be validated?
Yeah, you can say that the latest version of the ISO standard 13485 actually states from 2016 that if you're using a computer program as part of your QMS system, then you have to do validation. It's not very specific on how to validate, but it kind of raises that requirement. Then there's also an older guideline with the Annex 11 that also specifies validation, which is a EU guideline. And then the 21 CFR Part 11, which is a very old requirement, actually states that if you're using a closed system and so on, then you have to do validation.
Okay, so mainly there is a lot of requirements in terms of validation, but as you mentioned, for the ISO, they just tell you that you have to validate it, but you don't know specifically how to do that. So you have to convince the auditors for the ISO that your system is validated. So then maybe the next question can be, how can we do that? How can a medical device manufacturer, convince an auditor that his software is fine, is protected, and there is no kind of way to hack it or to update or to change information that are inside without really kind of a trail or an audit trail?
You can say that if you're trying to define validation, it's kind of focusing that you have confidence that the intended use, that it is reliable, and you can ensure that every time you're using this system, it will use it will function in a very specific way. So that's actually validation, and you're totally right that I see many questions out there about how do I do validation, and just some overseen standard is that ISO actually came out in 2018, I think, with a technical report, 80,002 Part 2, which actually explains in details how to do validation. So if you want a starting point, you want to do validation on yourself, this is a starting point.
Just maybe for that, so are we on this ISO that you are mentioning, so is it something that is specific for eQMS or it's for all software that you have maybe for a company?
It's for quality management systems.
Okay.
So it's very specific. And you can also say that I saw your podcast with some other people that did validation of, according to ISO 60,000 and something, it's for if the medical device itself is a software, or if you have software which is a part of the medical device, then you have to go by this standard.
Yeah, I remember it was, I think, the episode with Bill Stam and Rafael Blanco related from General Digital Software Services. So they were talking mainly about product validation. I think I touched a bit about the quality management system or some software validation that are more system validation, but we really were focused on this episode. Yeah. So if you want to go, it's episode 11, and you can really have a look of what we are discussing about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can also take one of the parts that they mentioned in that episode was actually that when you are doing on quality management system, it is kind of an easier task, and you have to focus on the intended use and the use cases. That is actually the part, and it makes it kind of doable and more easy. And it actually also means that the company will be doing use cases that is aligned with how they're using the software in the daily business, which actually means that this kind of testing is actually very good for the training purposes as well.
Okay, so when we are saying what is the intended use of the software and everything, so if we say, for example, the software is for storing documents, so we are trying to make the validation of how the software is storing documents, protecting documents. If it is about access to the information, we are checking if the access can be correctly done with the password, login, etc. Is it that we are talking about? Are we doing a list of all what is linked to the intended use?
You can say that there are requirements in the regulation, and this specific area that you're tapping into now regarding ensuring the identity, these are some of the Part 11 requirements actually. So you're totally right that you have to see that if you enter the system, that it prompts for a password, that the password is private. There's a procedure that every 3 months that it asks for a new password, and also that if you enter the wrong password, that you don't get access. Actually.
Yeah.
So this is some kind of the basic testing that you do, but you also go through the process that, so if you have this for document management system, you go through kind of authoring process, building it on a template, going into review, capturing review, seeing that people's capturing of review is actually made as a record. You go through approval, and you also see that the files or the records that the system is intended to produce, that it actually produces these files in a constant manner every single time you do it.
Okay, yeah. So it's mainly there is no changes when we are doing an action. The action is consistent. If you do 3 times, 4 times, 10 times, it will be exactly the same result, which helped, if I can say, to prove that the system is not changing their mind. Like, I suppose it's like artificial intelligence because it's a system that is learning each time, so it can change maybe some of the other things. Here, it really should be constant, static, fixed, and we have really the same result each time.
Yeah, because one of the things that these processes are also that you can see there are also some requirements that there is kind of a range and order of operations that has to be done in a specific way. You cannot release a new document without approving it.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of go through these steps so these are some of the details. But I would like to actually start that the first thing you actually need to do when you decide is, do I actually need to do validation or not? Because you have to do a regulatory criticality assessment, where you actually look at if the intended use is a part of the regulation. So if it is part of the regulation, then you have to do validation. And then after you have decided if you have to do validation, if the answer is yes, then actually the next question is, do you need Part 11 compliance? Meaning that is this system something that captures electronic approvals? So you can actually have a validated system that is not Part 11, but you cannot have a Part 11 compliance system that isn't validated. That's
okay.
Impossible.
So it's really interesting. So you have really you are not just heading up to the validation. You are really making kind of a diagnostic of it, situation. Yes. To check what really needs to be validated or not, or if it needs to be validated. Because when you said the first thing, does it need to be validated, means that we can say yes or we can say no. So it's not like mandatory to say yes, we have to be validated.
And it is also, when you go through this exercise, you also become very specific about what is the intended use. And the intended use also goes into the risk analysis that you also have to do in order to actually say, okay, what can go wrong if if the process that I have inside of the system will actually fail.
Okay, so then we have a software. We need to ask ourselves if we need to validate it or not. We need to really ask ourselves what is the intended use of this software, and then really match this with the validations. Then we start, if I can say, to do the validation. So we start to do all the tests needed. But as soon as it's done and we have finalized those validations, so are we done, or is there some other actions to do?
You can say that you cannot just because validation is not just equal to testing.
Okay.
I think that's very important. So actually, when you first reach the decision that you need to do validation, you actually need to write a validation plan.
Okay.
And this kind of specifies the activities that you are planning, also why you're doing these activities, and it also defines the kind of responsibilities. When you have this, and you also have the risk analysis, you also have this, you make this kind of install plan, because you have to understand there are some kind of infrastructure that you need to establish. So you have this installation plan, and you also have this specific document that's called the installation qualification. And this is because that you're operating on a qualified environment. You cannot have a validated application that is not running on a qualified environment. So the installation qualification is documenting what have I installed at what time, and that some kind of expert actually signed for, that he actually tested that it was working as intended after the installation process. So this is also about versions, timing, who did what, and approvals.
It's also something that when you get a software or something, they are saying to you, here are the requirements in terms of the machine that will get this software. It should be Windows 10, or it should be this number of RAM and this and that. This is mainly the information you will have also on the installation qualification to say, yes, I respected the supplier or the vendor requirements to install this product, so I didn't put that in an old machine or something that is not really compatible to it.
Yes.
So in terms of validation is one thing. So I suppose there are a lot of updates also that are happening with software. So
we need to be a little bit more kind of specific on the validation, because one of the things that's very important is training. So the first thing as part of the validation is actually being specific about who needs to be trained in what.
Okay.
So you have different processes, you kind of map out who needs to be trained in what, and at that point of time you can also make a kind of an overview about the training material that you will be using for these people. And training is very, very important, because just as I said in the first podcast that we did, is that building the local competences in the company that's implementing this system, that is the key thing that the company should be working on. Because when you have something that people really understand, they're happy with it, it works every single time, and it will be efficient.
And when we are talking about training, so for example, we have the administrator of the software that has a specific training, the creator of documents, the approver of documents will have a specific training, and the one that is only reading the documents will have another specific training. So it depends really of what is the function of each user, that we have a degree of information related to the user. Is that correct?
That's correct. And so you have first the training plan, and later in the project you actually record the actual kind of training. And then back to one of the things you start mentioning, then the testing, because you cannot just say go test the software. Okay. You actually have to build the test protocols, and this is totally the same if you are building a medical device. Is you actually go into OQ and PQ, where you have an approved test protocol that totally specs out what are you testing, what are the expected outcomes of the testing, and you actually have this template for capturing the results. And here it's actually important that you actually do the testing in the real environment that is kind of alike what will be used when we go for production. And it also means that involving some of the users, because we need to see it actually working in their specific environment. So you write out the protocols. You actually also do training for the users that are participating on doing the testing, and then you record the test results, and out of that comes some kind of observations that you need to act on.
Okay, so at this point, I think then we have kind of finalized the setup of the program, and we have everything that can be used by the people. So they can start to use it because they are trained, the software is validated, and everything is.
There's one thing we need, and that's the plan for the cutover. Because you have some kind of procedure today, and you're going. So I kind of normally say on the Friday we will be closing down your old process and your old kind of record keeping system, and on Monday we will start up, and whatever you're left in the old environment you will be expecting to find in the new environment. And here you have the set of activities you have to go through in order to make that cutover. So you actually close down and ensure that the old files in their old locations can be read but cannot be updated, and you move everything into the new environment so that everything that is needed for operating in the new system is actually in there. Okay. And this cutover plan is actually also part of the testing, because you normally try the cutover plan in order to actually see if the cutover will actually work. And at that point of time, after doing the cutover, there is a meeting with the people in charge of the company where you make a decision if you go live or not, because you still have an opportunity to fall back to the old process. But if you say we're all good to go, then you go live, and then you are in business.
Yeah. So from the beginning to the end, how long approximately we can have for this type of validation?
It can actually be all down to almost 2 weeks. It can take 5 weeks, but it also depends on if it's a huge organization with a lot of history, and if you go down that road where you are having a bigger scope, then of course it will take more time. But actually running the tests is not something that is very, very time consuming, but it also depends on the software that you're using. If it is something that was designed custom built for this organization, because in those kind of situations you normally find more observations you need to take care of. It's a very established system that has been used in a lot of different places. Then you often see very few mistakes, and then you can easily go into kind of production, and then it will only take weeks.
Okay, so I think it's really interesting. So it's not like a process validation with a product. It's really taking less time than that, because here we have also some processes, like when I'm talking about processes, more about like a sterilization process or cleaning process, where we have all the tests to be done, but also the lab results, etc., etc. Here we have really everything that can be done at one place, and with a shorter time. Yes. Now that we have everything in place, there is one risk or one thing that can happen is about changes to the software, changes to the environment, changes to something that you already validated. So I think here we have also to think about revalidation.
Yes. You're kind of, you can say that there are kind of two schools for the validation. And I can say that I was probably brought up on the first one, where you validate and then you just try to keep everything stable so you don't have to do any validation. And you only do validation when you have a gun to your head. Okay. But the problem that we see right now is that not applying updates to system, patching it and so on, it creates openings and weaknesses in the software. And we unfortunately see reports from some companies that they get hacked and that they get into trouble. So actually having a process where you are prepared for changes, and where you see changes as something that is good, is actually something that you need to go into. And on the company that I run, we are working in the cloud, so we do updates at least every month, and that means that having a process for change control, having templates and a process for doing revalidation constantly is something we need, and that was something I needed to learn how to actually establish. But going with the concept of change is good. That's something that companies should try to adapt to.
Okay. No, I think it's important that to notice that that when you have finalized this kind of project, you should also think of making it stable and not changing at all anything, so that you are in the safe side. But with all, as you mentioned, all the updates that are happening with maybe Windows or with Mac or with all the things, so it can be important to keep your system updated and that there is no hacking, if I can say, that can happen to it. And more importantly, because also it's on the cloud, as you mentioned, so that it's not like something that is based inside the company. So there are also some weaknesses also that can happen if you are not updating your system. In terms of audit now, so tomorrow I have an auditor that arrived to my company. He sit down and he's telling me, can you show me the validation of your eQMS? What should I start to show him? What is the first thing I should start to show him? First, for me, first, I will just suggest maybe first the procedure for software validation. Is it something that you can show?
That won't. Of course we could show that, but that won't be the first thing he will be asking for.
Okay.
He will be asking for the certificate of validation, and so one thing you have is that whoever validated this for you, if you did it yourself or if you had a company that did it for you, they will do a validation report. And what also goes on top of this is the validation certificate. It is kind of a one page that kind of points to some of the key references of the documents. It also lists kind of versions and so on. But it's and I can actually tell you that I was with one of our customers last week, where they said, well, we are getting audited. And I was kind of available at the time, and 20 minutes into the audits, they came for me saying, well, they want to see proof of validation. And I say, okay, that's no problem. So the first thing she asked for was the certificate, then she wanted to see the report, then she wanted to see the validation plan. Okay. So there's kind of, there are some key deliverables that you have to have available, and based on the auditor's preferences and ideas, they might dig further into the documentation. So having a validation certificate, validation report, validation plan, if you have made an external audit during the project about somebody external checking for this, that's also something that's good. But then proof of testing, test conclusions, the filled out test protocols, the risk analysis and the conclusions of that. These are all documentations based on how deep the auditor goes. And you have some that just sees the validation certificate and they're happy. Others go nuts and go down into the paper stack.
As you said, so it depends on the auditors, because you have some auditors that are really maybe specialized in software or specialized in those kind of field, and so they like also to see those kind of documents and read them and ask questions about it and why you haven't done this, why you haven't done that. Yes. And I suppose there are also some auditors that are not really specialized in all the development or design of a quality management system or software, and they are just checking that everything is available and that the documents or the content makes sense, if I can say so.
And I think I should also make a point of that if you have implemented a standard system in a standard way, that's easier to validate, instead of you started with a standard system and then you did a lot of custom coding. All those custom codings, you have to validate that individually and kind of prove that it works. And you almost have to have a design control procedure around it, since you are going into the development of software actually. Okay. So that's also why I try to say to companies, well, you didn't go into this industry of medical devices to build a software. You wanted to build a device. And so if you want a system for QMS, then try to take something that's standard and just try to take something that is mature, and where there's an easy process where there is a supplier that has a regulatory understanding so they can help you implement it, and where you can spend your time on learning and instead of spending your time on making user requirements, designing system code. You don't want to go there. You don't have time for that. Only the big companies can afford to go in that direction. And I would say that most companies can easily work inside a standard QMS systems, and there are a lot of the choices out there actually.
So one thing also that is dangerous as soon as you start to customize a software or to have your own code is sometimes if you are a small company and you don't have the bigger structure as you mentioned with the big companies, is the fact that the person that customizes the software, the IT person that customizes software is maybe not doing that in a conventional way, or maybe doing that correctly. But at the end, when this person is leaving and you have maybe another IT person coming, then you are in trouble because they don't know exactly how to do that. They don't know how to change, how to update, because it's something that is not kind of standard. So it's also important to keep things standard, because as soon as you customize, the person who has made this customization is kind of really critical for your company if you want to keep this software there. So it's really important. Okay, so Jacob, is there something else related to validation, or I think we really covered the topic now?
I think we have kind of that we have done the program. Maybe I should say a little bit about some of the experiences about what I see on companies and how far they actually have been able to establish these kind of systems. And it is actually a little bit sad to say that I see that it is mainly the big resourceful companies that has been able to establish these kind of electronic systems. When I visit smaller, mid-sized companies, they have some kind of IT system, but they get audited on the paper records. So there are many companies out there that that have actually not started on the journey. And you can also say that there is a cost of this actually. Because as I mentioned in the first podcast, I think every company should start on paper, but at some point of time, they need to make this journey. Because there are three kind of consequences. First, there's the loss of process efficiency. Everything is manual. So authoring, approving, versioning, retiring, archiving, everything you have to do on paper. And the regulation states that you have to keep at least one copy of every version that you have ever done. So that's not doable. And what actually happens is that many companies don't get the audit trail established on some of their early records, which means that the proof of what have gone on in the early days is probably not there, and it will be very hard to actually do. If you start in a system, it's a built-in function that whatever change you do, it will record it. It will capture the exact date, who did what, and it will keep it forever. But since you don't have that, all this is kind of manual. It also means that process automation, like when you have an SLP where people have to acknowledge that they have read it and understood it, you're on your own. Every time there's a new version, you have to capture the proof that they've read and understood it. Removing of historical versions that are outdated, you have to do that by hand. Referencing between the record, searching, like you also pointed out earlier. Well, just searching inside a file folder will mostly just meaning that you're searching on the file names. When you certainly have it in a real system, it gives you a whole new kind of way. And you can also say that when you have a paper file structure, it's kind of one-dimensional system that you have, because you can only see your records in one way. You open up your file, there's an index, you can go that. When you have an electronic system, you can build views where you can see and you can turn the records around. You can see them without duplicating the record. But this is all non-existing. And then I will also make a reference to the podcast you did together with Jason Lim from Singapore, I think.
Yeah.
He said that there's a risk of introducing two parallel worlds of one thing that's what is written in the procedure and another thing that's practiced. If you have an eQMS that is a practical zoom that is aligned with the procedure, you have a higher success rate of actually establishing that these two worlds are actually more united. And I think that's very that companies that are working in these manual systems are not compliant, but the cost of compliance is higher because there's more hours involved in just record keeping, and processes are just more time consuming when you have no automation. And sometimes also when you are making changes, understanding the scope of the change and what records needs to be changed as part of some specific change can be very difficult if you're working in a very, very manual system. And then I must say that potential for making mistakes are higher when you are working in a manual system. The record keeping of versioning, taking things out of archives and so on, well, it's all manual and somebody has to do it. Lack of overview of pending assignments that are not completed, you're just not aware that that was not approved or there's a signature missing or something like that. References are wrong, and then just common misplacing a record, because when you have a paper archive, then often you will bring a folder out to your desk, open up, and you will read some kind of, and suddenly when you come into an office and you see some kind of vital record just lying there on the table, you get these kind of thrills down your back saying, well, if I cannot find this, so just putting it in the wrong part of the index, and when you're sitting in the audit, you cannot find it. If you're working in an electronic system, you know that the records will stay there forever.
No, it's great.
And you will always find them.
Yeah, it's great because I don't know if, maybe in the audience, if they already participate to some audits with some auditors, it can be a stressful situation, to be honest. It's like, can you find me this procedure? Can you find me this document? And I remember my really old time, when I came to the audit room with the binder, open it in front of the auditor, looking at where is the document he was looking for. Yes. And even at one point, as I had no experience, giving the document directly to him without reading that and finding the mistake inside or not was really...
And I will also say one thing regarding audits is that when you have a paper archive, preparing for an audit is actually something where you have to set time off, because you have to go through your paper records and make sure that everything is updated and in the right place. If you have an electronic system, having just FDA walking in from one day to another is actually possible, because you are much more prepared, because you know that if you are kind of having the reviews and closing down your records where you are evaluating that they are in the right place, that means also when you get back to it next time, they will be in the right place. And you will have an overview that any pending activity has been closed.
No, I think it's really a great point. And I remember to the people that, so you are the CEO of SimplerQMS, which is an eQMS solution that is also helping medical device companies. So you are really trying to translate all what is in terms of the regulations to your system, so that it can really help manufacturers, help them to not lose time, to really go quickly to the point. And as you mentioned, we are, medical device manufacturers are mainly here with the objective to manufacture and to sell products. They are not here to really try to manage all these administrative burdens. So this is something that you can help them to remove and to be on the right place. So Jacob, you also last episode, just as a reminder, last episode you provided a giveaway, so some just a kind of a small presentation about the topic we discussed today about the episode. So you will do the same for this one. So mainly provide also a giveaway. So I will put that also on the show notes.
Yes. Yeah, you can say that the things that we're offering is that there is a checklist for establishing a eQMS, And we also offer a workshop together with any company that would like to have kind of try to define a scope. How can they actually get started to establish an eQMS?
Okay, great. So thank you for that. So you just have to answer, to write him an email and just mention Easy Medical Device so that he knows that you are coming from this episode. Okay, Jacob. So I think really we had really great information here. I hope now with those 2 episodes, so this week and last week episode, if people have a project to implement an eQMS, then they know now how to do that or what are the phases they have to follow, and also about validation, how to validate an eQMS and how to present that to an auditor. So what exactly are the deliverables or documents that they have to present to an auditor? So Jacob, then I really thank you. I also said that people can find you directly on LinkedIn or at SimplerQMS.com. And I think you can directly answer their question if they have also a question there.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Jacob, then, and I wish you a nice day.
Take care. Bye-bye.